Episode 133 of the podcast. Storyboards? Good? And bad?
Welcome to the Wandering DP Podcast, where we focus on Leica photography, cinematography, and life offset. And now, your host, Patrick O'Sullivan.
And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are back for another episode of the podcast, episode 133, and we have had some killers on the show lately. There's no doubt about it. We have had our UK contingency on the show, Colin Watkinson, Rupert Sanders. Today we're going to hear from the Wonder Boy, who's out in the field via the hotline, and we're going to have some killer interviews coming up as well. We've got lots of fantastic cinematographers up who are doing some killer work, but that is not the case today. Today is another episode that we are breaking down a commercial, and this is the very final one. I know there'll be tears. If you're a new listener, this episode should be interesting. If you've been listening for a while, you'll definitely notice the people involved in this commercial and the setup and the story, and this, I promise, is the very last one of these, but it's been an interesting journey over the past, I think we've done 5 days of this commercial. And it was an insurance ad that we shot in LA, and it's been fun seeing it, but this is the very last one that we're going to do, I promise. And so that is what we're going to be breaking down today. It is, as we've talked about many times on the podcast, it's a guy who does a little meet and greet. He goes inside of a garage to check out a car of a customer. It's a spokesman, and away we go from there with the story. But before we get there, what do we got? This is big news, and I've talked about it before, and I've made reference to it before, but I've never actually followed through. But now, because we're on YouTube and you're looking at me, now you'll be able to see exactly what's going to happen. But we are days away from moving out of here, out of the closet. I'm not actually out of the closet in a sexual way, but I am out of the closet in a podcast way and in a studio way. We are moving into a dedicated studio for the show, also to house the copious amounts of shit that I have acquired in terms of gear. So that is happening, and I don't know if it's going to happen this week or the next week. Either or, it's coming soon. So it'll be a new set behind me, and hopefully it'll be better acoustics, and I'll have room for my stuff, and my wife and daughter you won't be able to hear in the background of the show anymore, which will be a sad thing, but also probably a positive thing. So that is the exciting news that's happening here around the show. Over on Patreon this week, we've got another live stream, and I'll tell you what, it is one of the real benefits of, everybody knows now if you're listening to the show for a while, what the Patreon is all about. The live stream is we break down, or we look at some of the user content that you guys have gone out and shot, and I didn't think that I would like it as much as I do, but there is a real, I don't want to say that I attribute any of the Patreon success to this podcast, but there is elements you start to see. I feel like, not a proud dad, but just a proud person to be looking at these things and have people in the group sharing them and seeing ideas come from the show and seeing people go out there and put those into practice. And then you see the quality of the stuff, and I start to question myself, what am I doing with my life? I need to get out there and do some of this stuff. Like, this is very, very high level stuff, and it's fun to break it down over on the podcast. So that is what we will be doing over on live stream. Plus, now, because it's sort of hard to describe, I appreciate the support of the show, and I appreciate the Patreon supporters allowing us to get more in-depth and more detailed, and there's exciting things coming for the show, and it allowed us to go to Los Angeles and get all these interviews. So without that support, it just wouldn't happen. But also, it's hard to sort of say, listen, for that support, I'm going to give you access to this live stream. So to show people exactly what it's like and what happens in those things, that the behind-the-scenes access. Now I'm going to start releasing those videos on YouTube, just little snippets of it. So generally, the live stream will go from anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. And I'm just going to be releasing over on YouTube a couple minutes of those clips or those streams each and every week as standalone videos. So if you're interested in what the live stream has to offer, you'll be able to go to YouTube and check it out there and see for yourself whether or not you want to become a supporter of the show. So that's fun, and that's new, happening this week. Okay. Should we talk about the shoot details? Even though this is round 5 of this show, in this breakdown, we're going to be looking at a spokesman. He is walking along the street, minding his own business. He recognizes a customer who's in his garage washing his car, just having finished work on his car. He says hello. They have a little meet and greet outside of the garage, and then they go into the garage. And garage segments like this are hard to do because you have such a drastic change in exposure, a drastic change in contrast, that you have to manage that. And you can do that a couple different ways. You can manage it through the lighting, which is one way to balance things out. But when you're talking about an exposure change so great between the outside and the inside, a traveling shot between the two becomes almost impossible without a really, really large setup and a large crew and a big rig, or just the perfect day or the perfect garage setup. With lights inside the garage or windows inside the garage to try and balance that exposure. When you don't have the perfect setup, you have to do it through angles. And we're going to be talking about focusing a lot on the storyboards versus what we actually did on the day, because storyboards can be helpful, right? We've talked with lots of cinematographers and directors that enjoy the storyboarding process because it gives you a chance to just vomit your ideas out and get something on the page to where if you have a moment of panic on set, you can always go back to the storyboards and go, okay, this is what we need next. This is what I need to be doing now. This is how the story will flow together. And some people are very stringent and stick to those things. But a lot of the times, the storyboards, especially for commercials, are done before you see the locations. So it can be tricky to follow those, especially when you have an agency that is quite demanding and a director who will start to feel the pressure. If things aren't going right, they'll start to feel the pressure of those boards, and then there comes those conversations where it doesn't look like the boards. How do we make it look more like the boards? And you want to avoid those things. So luckily enough, we were working with a very experienced crew and a fantastic director, Seth Epstein, over at Los York, and it was just a real pleasurable experience. And that's another thing is, when you see this is it's an insurance ad, and it's for people. If you have viewed any of the past episodes you've seen, it's for people who are getting up in their years, right? People who are closer to death than you and I. And a lot of the times you'd think, well, this is not a Nike job or Adidas, or it may not be that exciting, but these are the really, really fun jobs because you got good people. I talked about the director, the crew. We're in Los Angeles. The sun is shining. Life is good. The schedules are not too crazy. You've seen that from the behind the scenes episodes if you're a Patreon supporter, where you come on set. The schedules aren't super crazy. You got a lot of time to, not a lot of time, but you have enough time to be able to have some fun with the image and to get what it is we're trying to go for, even though we may not be in the perfect locations at the perfect time of day. This is the fun stuff. This is the challenge. And there is something to be said about getting out there and solving problems, which is the part that I like, and doing so in a nice area, a comfy environment where you're having good times with good folks. So this is really a bread and butter job. This is what is fun about doing this stuff. So I'm happy to get to share it with you guys now. So we shot on two Arri Alexa minis, and from Panavision. We talked about the lens situation before, so I won't rehash that, but we shot a mixture of ultra speeds and super speeds from Panavision, which proved to be quite a story. Now, this was the very first day of our shoot, which means we didn't really have the colors dialed in from the DIT, whose name, why can't I remember you? I should have written this stuff down before we started. And we had a different B-cam operator because John Chima, this is also a good example of getting work in a spot where there's lots of work, is that cinematographers or DPs will recommend other DPs or other operators for jobs as they come up, and they can't do them. There was a conflict with schedules, and John said, I can do these days, but I can't do this one. Here's a name, and I will put that name in the show notes. It's Colin something, was the B-cam operator, and just an awesome experience, right? Just someone who comes in and crushes it, who's got the experience, who has the hours, who you don't have to worry about too much. And on previous shows, I mentioned that this is really the A camera was shooting the story, essentially the boarded story, and trying to find the best angles for those boarded stories, which we'll talk about. But the B camera was there for textural moments and to help speed things up a little bit because we were working with non-actors. We knew we had to get the interview section or the sit-down piece covered as much as we could because we weren't going to get a lot of takes out of it. So, but that's an example where John wasn't available. He says, hey, this is my solution. And I don't think twice about it. I said, okay, well, I know that John's going to be on the shoot. John's recommending this person. I don't have to vet them or it's already taken care of, because if the guy sucks, then I say to John on day 2, you fucked me here big time. What happened? So that's it. It's personal recommendations. It's a personal business. No matter how much you want to get on Instagram and take pictures of the camera rigs, really it comes down to the people that you work with and how nice you are, and that's what's going to get you more jobs. And this was just a classic example of that. So Colin did a great job. Now, I mentioned what we're shooting on. We're shooting 2 cameras. This example. If we look at, let's go into shot number 1. Should we do shot number 1, or should we do the music bed, ladies and gentlemen? You see how I'm getting better at leading you down a false road. I'm getting better at teasing you with the actual information that I promised, and then I hit you with an ad. And today's ad, as always, is from the fine folks at the music bed. Now, if you don't like the music bed, ladies and gentlemen, I don't like you. And that's not true, and it's not in the copy either. I just made that bit up because it sort of rhymed. Okay, here we go. We got music bed, and what do we have? Have we got a film and music conference 2018 coming up, September 28th and 29th in Fort Worth, Texas, the Lone Star State. Film and music conference brings top creatives and filmmakers together for 2 days of inspiration, education, and new connections. Connections being the operative word there. Tickets are $599, but you, and you alone, can save 10% off with the code WanderingDP. Now, this is the kind of function. This is the kind of event where the Wandering DP listeners, I can't believe I just said that, where you folks, the listeners, you're going to want to reach out to other people. You're going to want to say, hey, I listened to the show. That immediately says, well, we have something in common. I, too, think Patrick should say, yes, less, and yes, less, and should just be quiet during the interviews. I too think that. So you share a common bond there. And that's where I think something like this event is really going to pay off for you. And I know it was a big success last year for the music bed and for Film Supply. So I'm excited, and I'm going to try. I'm going to do my damnedest to get there this year. It all depends on the schedules, but there's going to be some fantastic speakers there. And last week we talked about Robert Legato, the Oscar-winning VFX supervisor. We talked about Franklin Leonard, the founder of The Blacklist, Rain Allen Miller, and we talked about all these folks, really. We talked about Dallas Taylor, who's sound designer / mixer for networks like NBC, Fox, G4, and Discovery. He launched De Facto Sound, which a lot of people on Vimeo will be familiar with. They're pretty much in every other Vimeo staff pick. They have something like that. And those are the kind of quality people that you're going to get to be speaking there. And yes, you're going to go home with great information, but more important, you're going to have a good time. And you are going to meet a lot of people that, what's 10% of $599, ladies and gentlemen? Help me do the math. What is that, $50? Not $50, $60. So if we say you get a single day work out of going to the conference, you pretty much paid it back. Plus, I'm sure you can write this off as a tax thing. So I really see no downside to it. The upside is you get to go to Texas. You get to have some fun. There's probably some sort of hotel shenanigans that get up to at these conferences or these little events. So if you are looking for a good time and not in a bathroom stall sort of road stop way, if you're looking for some fun, the 28th and the 29th, Fort Worth, Texas, the music bed, use the code WanderingDP, and that will save you some cash. And that is it for the advertisement, I'm sure. A lot of people are going to be going. I know on the Facebook group we've had a bunch of people say that they will be attending, so it will be a fun event. Okay, now with that out of the way, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. We're looking at shot number 1 here, and this is a guy walking down the street, and we will have recognized this guy from the past 4 episodes. He's walking down the road, and we know that we have to frame him in such a way. Remember when we're looking at these shots that this is A and B cam rolling at the same time, so we're intercutting footage, and I won't necessarily remember which was A cam and which was B cam. That's a lie. I always remember my own shots, so I know which ones are mine and which ones are Colin's. I think that's his name, Colin. It's going to be embarrassing if it's not, but it's going to be in the show notes page. And we know in this first shot, we need to introduce our spokesman. People have to know who he is. We need a little spot for the graphic, which means we need to place him on one side of the image. So here he's on the left-hand side. He's coming down the road, and again, with the orientation and the schedule, we were going to have to shoot and maintain a consistency throughout the entire day, which meant it's not like a montage commercial where you can jump space and time and be all over the place. We really needed to have the same look over the 8 hours that we were going to be at this house. We needed to have that same look carry over the whole day. And we know that's one of the hardest things to do, day exteriors, especially in a sunny place like Los Angeles, where you're going to have to track the sun all day long. You're going to have to make sure that the shadows are lining up. You're going to have to remember your blocking and your angles. And this is where maybe taking the exact frame from the storyboard that wasn't used for the location or wasn't done after the location was locked in, that's where it's going to be challenging. So here, the idea is we wanted to compress the space as much as possible and go on the longest lens that we possibly could. So A and B camera are both on super long lenses. And what that does is it just compresses the background and flattens everything off so you can see the length of the fence on the frame right-hand side. That is, I don't know, maybe 60 feet of fence. And it's just very, very small and compressed on the shot, which makes the guy seem a little bit larger. We can pull him out with some depth of field. We can really make sure that all of the focus is going on our man. And you can see he's on a suburban street. We wanted to keep things non-LA, so we couldn't really show that many palm trees. So we were not blowing out the background, but providing enough blur in the background so we couldn't really tell what it is. But the idea is with that opening shot, you got to set the scene. Where are we? We're on a suburban street. You can see the sidewalk going all the way down. And in terms of composition, you see the little tiny fence, which is nice. That creates another line in the image, and layering it with that light to dark happens because of the angle of the sun. And when we went out there on the Tech Scout, we knew, okay, the sun is going to come up from the right-hand side of the frame. We want the house to be backlit in later shots, so we need to be here very early. And this is the shot that we started with. So we didn't even need the sun to be above the house at this point, which is why we started with this shot. We wanted the sun to be above the house to be backlit later on in the day. So we decided, okay, let's start out the front. We'll work our way in. It'll help the non-talent or the non-actor talent to feel more comfortable. They'll know their space. Talk through with Seth, the director, be like, okay, this makes sense for everybody. It makes sense story-wise. It makes sense for the talent. It makes sense for everybody watching to be able to follow along with the story. So we start out front, and you can see on the bottom right-hand side of the frame, if you were to just have this flat with nothing in the foreground, nothing in the just in front of the lens to sort of break things up, it would be rather boring. But here we have that little bush on the right-hand side of the frame, and that's just breaking it up and adding another layer, because to try and make this thing three-dimensional, we can use light, and then we can use composition, and we can use elements in the frame. So that's what's happening here, camera right. That little bush is just adding something a little bit closer to the lens to make things more interesting and not quite as boring. But for lighting, we've got the sun, camera right, which is in between. It was just a little bit of high cloud. It wasn't full-on sun. And we were mixing in a 12 by frame, which would have been something a very light diffusion, like a half soft frost, something very light when the full sun did come out. But because he's only taking a few steps, our talent, we were able to say, okay, this is our money spot. We'll get him to walk the whole thing. But really, the 36 frames that we need, that's going to happen here. And we shot this at 50 frames per second, this opening bit, because we really just needed a quick wave from this position. And sometimes slowing things down just gives you that opportunity where you can just speed it up a little bit in post and just get that one grab, that one little snippet of a moment where he's covered by the diffusion, where he's looking good and he gives that wave, and that just gives you enough time. So this was shot at 50 frames per second. And the idea and the reason that the 12 by diffusion works is, and that you don't notice it, is because of the levels in the background. Had the level in the background been getting hit with full sun, it would have been a real problem, because then our man in the middle ground, he would look abnormally dark, because the diffusion will take light, break it up, and then soften it. And as the level lowers, that makes him darker than the background. But because the sun hadn't come up and around yet and been hitting the background, it was only lightly sort of getting that ambient sky level. It doesn't look too strange. And what the 12 by frame of diffusion does is it just softens the light coming onto him, where you still have that shadow wrap, but it just is a little bit less harsh and a little bit more pleasant. We're not going for some grungy, post-apocalyptic world that he's walking in. He's just walking down a nice, friendly suburban street, and we wanted the lighting to feel like that. So over frame right, we've got that 12 by of half soft frost. Then camera left, which is the same thing we did a few episodes ago, the same walking idea, is we lined the entire street with, not the entire street, the entire walk we lined with blacks. So I think it was a 12 by 40 and then a 12 by 12 at the end. And that's camera left, and it's just tucked in as close to the frame lines as possible. So it's just outside the frame. And that is just stopping the ambient from bouncing all over the place. You could definitely shoot it without it, but it would just become a lot more flat. And we wanted that shape, and we wanted those shadows, and we wanted that density in the image. So we're just lining the whole way with blacks. And that probably makes the most difference. Even the softening with the 12 by 12, like I say, you could get that just by waiting for that cloud moment rather than shooting with the 12 by 12, especially when it's in and out. You can just wait for it to be a little bit softer, the light, and then still use, you couldn't really do it though. You couldn't get the shape without the neg on camera left. So that's it for this first shot, right? Where everything is normal, just standard ND in front of the lens, 2 cameras rolling, waiting for this shot, using the composition, using the time of day to our advantage, so as not to get a super hot background. And then in the frame, again, you've got the sidewalk in the background. You want to look for, especially in these opening shots, we needed immediacy of location. We needed to know exactly where we are as soon as the frame opens up. First shot, here we are. We're walking along a sidewalk. We know that because the sidewalk's in the background. Our man's walking. There's a little tiny bush. The little bush is saying hello. So we know we're in some sort of suburban environment. Okay, let's go to shot number 2. This is where you can see the schedule start to pay dividends. And in the storyboards, it wasn't written up like this. There was no frame like this. It was just we needed to link our spokesman on the sidewalk with our car that we're going to be looking at in the garage. Now, you'll notice, the first thing is, you'll notice the orientation of the sun, right? The sun is now above the house. You can see the shadows on the ground, and it's frame right, above the house and frame right. What that does is it creates a backlit house, which means the parts that are directly behind our subject, where the focus is and where we want to be looking, you see how that's dark. And our subject has this little ring of light around him, backlit. This is why backlit is good, because it takes away distraction from the shitty stuff that we don't really want to be paying attention to, and it brings all of the focus onto the bit that where we want the viewer to look. And this, again, we knew we had to be here. I'm going to say this is 10 o'clock in the morning. We knew we had to be there at 10 o'clock for this specific shot, because this is probably the most important shot of the ad in terms of understanding the story. Because right now he's just, in shot number 1, he's just walking down the street. We don't know what the fuck he's doing. Could be doing anything. Could be, I don't know, walking to the shop. And we want to tie him in with this guy who's in the garage, and we got this car. And the car is really what the commercial's about, and this guy's relationship to the car, this customer. So once our spokesman says hello, we need to find a way. Basically, we're going to go into the garage, talk about the car, and talk about the customer's experience with the insurance. So we need to do that inside the garage. So we need a linking spot. We need these two to join up that'll transform us into the garage, give us a reason to get in there without just jumping straight into the garage. It wouldn't make any sense. So here, we need to identify, okay, we're at a house. This guy's got a car. He's washing it or polishing it or whatever he's doing with that rag. That's the important bit. Where he is in terms of the house, we don't really need to see that much of the house. We just need to know that it is a house. And here you've got a driveway in the shot that's cutting across, adding that line. You still got that white fence at the bottom. You got our man cutting across the screen, our spokesman. And then in the background where all the focus is, you got our guy. He's in yellow. The house is blue. It's backlit, the house. He's got his little edge. And most importantly, we've got that car. That car in the corner. Now, does it make sense that the car is sort of half out of the garage? No, it doesn't make sense. And we definitely could have backed the car all the way up, but then you couldn't see the thing. And it's very important that the car play a prominent role in this commercial. And we could have pulled the car all the way out. But then we would have had to do the interview part, or the sit-down part of the conversation, which we're going to get into later. We would have had to do that outside. And knowing from our schedule, we're going to be here 6 hours. It's going to be really hard to control the sun for 6 hours. And the storyboards were all set in the garage. We needed to be in the garage. So we just pulled the car out a little bit to the point where it's believable Then you've got this little overhang here on the garage. That's cutting a little bit of the light. We got a black car in a very dark garagey environment, right? This is the difficult part about garages, is the exposure is so different between, or the levels of light are so different from the outside to the inside. So this is where angles and cutting at the right time is going to be important to be able to transport us from the outside to the inside without a giant shift or noticeable blowout of backgrounds. So here we've got our man, and for lighting for this, all we've done is we've taken those blacks that were directly behind us or directly to the left in shot number 1. We've taken those blacks and we've pushed them as close as you can get to my back when I'm holding the camera. I mean, the blacks are basically sitting on top of me and the rig. And that's to take away all of the ambient light that is shooting back. All, the shitty ambient stuff that is pushing back into our man. Our spokesman isn't important now. I mean, we know him. We just saw him. We don't need to see him here. We want to add a little bit of shape, and we want to direct viewers' attention to where we want them to look, which is our guy in the background and the car. So those are what are in focus, and to help that along, we just takes 2 seconds. You say, let's move in the blacks, everybody. And the grips get on it. They move the thing in. You say it looks nice. And, you start rolling. So that shot links. And then for the rest of it, it's all time of day. It's all sun. It's all being there on the tech scout saying, okay, this is going to work. Because, you got those just a nice angle of the sun. Camera left, you've got that little bush, which is just catching just a little bit of light and then there's shadow. So we're going, if you follow across the frame, we're going from light to dark to light to dark, adding those layers, midground, foreground, background, adding the light layers through the backlight. So it's all pretty much there, and it's all really easy as long as you're there at the right time. If we would have been here 3 hours later, this whole house would have been completely lit up. It would have looked like shit. There would have been no edge on our man. Our guy in the foreground, he would have been all hot and gross. So we avoided that. Now, we go from the sidewalk to shot number 3, which is our meet and greet. And, this is a more cutting idea rather than a cinematography idea, but you sort of have to think about things in shot sizes. If we go from a long lens to a super wide close lens, it's not really going to make sense. You sometimes have to transition a little bit slower. So here we've just gone from the super long shot to this medium shot of the meet and greet, of people shaking hands. And this is going to be our 2 people shaking hands. And now the sun has come around even more. So now we're getting into that 10:30 range, and you can see the highlights. The easiest tell is the highlights on the back of our spokesman and the front of our guy in the yellow shirt. And if we would have just pivoted 2 or 3 steps to the right, we would be smashing into our spokesman's back, which would be all lit up, all front lit. So it only takes it's just a little tiny pivot to the left to make it backlit and make it look nice and to give it that shape. And again, we get the advantage of being here at this time. It shows us in the background, you've got those dark plants, you've got the dark house, but the edge on the people immediately draws the viewer's attention. We're shooting wide open on the super speeds and ultra speeds to give us that, we're in a sort of mundane, boring environment. We don't really need to see that back there. So we want to pull them out from it. So we're shooting wide open, and it just muddies up the look a little bit. It just looks a little bit shittier is not the word, but it's just degrades the image a little bit and makes it feel a little bit more unique. So from that shot, the lighting stays the same in all 3 of the next shots. So this handshake shot, the slightly wider shot, which is the B camera shot, which I thought is the best shot of this bunch. I mean, I was shooting the closer stuff, but then when I saw Colin's take on the framing here, for the B camera shot, which is the 2 shot with the car angle in there. That was good stuff. Very, very good stuff and not expected, but it worked really, really good with that reflection of the car. You've got the car highlight there. We'll get there. But in terms of lighting for shot 3, 4, and 5, all we did was, again, move in the blacks. So just trying to create as much shape as humanly possible. We took all the blacks that were down on the road. Now we've brought them up the driveway, lined them up behind both the cameras. And because we're not crisscrossing our angles, we're both trying to shoot in a backlit direction. It's a lot easier to light for, and it's a lot easier to manage the rags because you can have them in the same spots. Whereas if we were trying to shoot different angles like this, you may end up seeing one of the blacks, which is what we wanted to avoid. So that's that handshake shot. That handshake shot now is going to lead us into a conversation about the car. And this is where they're going to move into the garage. This is the important part. And this is where we sit down with the first AD and with Seth, the director, and we say, okay, how are we going to get in the house? I mean, how are we going to get in the garage? We need a point where we can go from outside to inside, like a transitional moment. And the transition moment when you have two people is really easy because we can focus on the customer. He can start to walk towards the garage. We can focus on the spokesman. Then we cut back to the customer. He's already in the garage. We miss that transitional moment where the exposure will be all fucked up. So this is perfect, right? This is the idea, but everybody's got to be on board. Seth has got to say, okay, yes, that makes sense for the cut. We can do that. Let's position everybody. Let's get the blocking down. It doesn't look anything like the storyboards anymore because, again, the storyboards had they didn't know the time of day or the angle of the sun. So you have to then go, okay, now you got to sell that back to the agency and to the client and say, listen, this is what we're doing now. They have to have faith and trust in the director to deliver the goods. And then you have to be able to show it really quickly. And you have to be able to change things on the fly because we're sitting there going, no, man, the boarded shots are not going to work. It's a good idea for pacing and for rhythm, but it's just simply not going to work in this environment. So here on that wider shot, now you can start to see the benefits of the setup that we're going for. So you've got the little edge in their hair, that goldeny sun that's peeking through. You've got the dark house in the background. You've got the blacks all down frame right, which is sucking up that contrast because once we go inside, things are going to get crunchy, which is why we're trying to maintain those darks while we're outside as well to keep that contrast consistent. So with that, the blacks down frame right, now you can actually see there's some sun based on the angle of the light. There's some sun that is actually hitting the house and then hitting them. And in a couple different takes, we blacked that up and then we opened it up for some, but we weren't using like a 12 by 12 ultra bounce. It was just the house that was reflecting the light, or the garage that was reflecting the light back at them to give them just a little bit of fill. So it felt quite natural to leave it. And with this shot with the car, it's just, again, the angle of the windshield, then the black car with the reflections in it, just a really, really easy way to link the two, because what's going to happen is now our customer, he's going to start walking and they're going to start talking about the car, and then we're going to flop and we're going to be inside the house. So this is the transitional moment. So what do we got here? That's that particular shot. Then we go to back to the A camera shot. Again, this is happening all at the same time. You can see this works for my angle as well. I've got that nice highlight in the hair. We don't want to come too far around to the right, or else we'd be shooting front on our customer, and we don't want that because he'd be all lit up, and he has a yellow shirt on and fairly pale skin, so we don't want him heating up too much. But as we come around here to the left, also, we're focusing more on our spokesman because he's going to do the chatting. He's going to be the focus until we go back to the customer who's already in the garage. Right? Because we see them in that wide shot, we see them walking towards the garage. We cut into the closer of both of them having a chat. We see our customer exit, and now we're on our spokesman. Next shot, we're going to be back on our customer. So we're jumping that line and ignoring the storyboards to get there. But it's the same setup. It's the same lighting. Everything's the same as before. It's just, this is more about angle, more about, and it's not something that we're actively talking about the whole time. It's just something, remember in your head, okay, I gotta get that guy out of the frame because, number one, it looks like shit with all that front light pouring on him. And number two, it's going to help. If we can just get the right angle on our spokesman, we can believably then cut to the next guy. And here, you've got what I'm looking at in the monitor when I'm shooting is we got some interesting things going on in this image. You've got the lines of the house in the background. They're not going directly into his eyes. The line that's coming from the house, the gutter, is not cutting right through his mouth or through his eyes. It's just slightly above. And then you've got the interesting shadow in the background, the level change on the roof because the roof is sloped and you have dark on one side, light on the other side. You've got the dark in the background of the house. Then you've got the little bit of light on the bushes. And again, it's just layers. Like the bush is one layer, the house is another layer. We're using the light contrast and the color contrast to make our man stand out. So that's all pretty standard stuff, right? Because we're not in the garage yet. We are coming up with solutions knowing We're going to be in that garage soon. And garages are tough. A tough sell in this situation, especially because there was one window in the garage, but it was really tiny. And the way that we're filming so far, you see how we're always shooting away from the garage in this meet and greet bit? And even in the part where we're down on the street, we're never shooting towards the garage. Because if we were shooting towards the garage, you'd see a big black blob. Because again, the exposure is so great, the difference is so great that it'd be very hard to balance without a lot of time to set up like an overhead lighting rig inside of the garage. And this one wasn't that tall, so it wouldn't be possible. So we're always looking away from the garage, which means when we get into the garage, light can only come from one direction. Light can only come from the open door. If you go back to shot number 2, light can only come in one way. And we know from experience that if light can only come in one way, then we only want to be shooting the opposite way. If we're shooting the same way that the light is going and we're shooting into this front lit pile of dog shit, that is not going to be good. So now we need to find ways to convince the director to change angles of the storyboards and go, yeah, I know that it's like this, and that would make sense, but it's not going to look very good. And it takes some showing, and it takes a little bit of talking and some trust from the director to go, yeah, you're right, or let's try it. Let's try it this one way. Let's try this another way. But this is where it's going to be difficult. This is where having light from only one direction, we need to get on the inside of that garage, on the other side of the car. We can't be looking into the garage. So we need to be looking out the garage, basically. And it's tricky because you can't be looking out of the garage either, because then the background, even though it's backlit, will still be way, way, way too bright. It's going to be super hot, and inside is going to be this dark, dark, cavernous hole, and we don't want that. So it's a balancing act of shooting like you're shooting out the door, but never showing the door, right? This is our little workaround trick. So, okay, we go from outside, we go from the meet and greet. We're now on our spokesman. We cut to a shot of the car and our customer in the house, or in the garage, sorry. We got a couple of different things going on. Now this is the first shot where we're using our lights. So you can imagine we go from that meet and greet stop, everybody stop work. Now we're going to bring in this big rig that will dictate the rest of the shooting day. So outside, we've taken a 20 by 20 black, and it wasn't a black. It was one of the blacks. I can't remember the name of it. That it's like a shade. You can actually see through it. Like some light gets through. It's not a net. It's not a net, but it's like a net, basically. And it's a black, and we put that over the garage door, if you look at shot number 2. And also, now for the show notes page, for all of these shots, I'm going to have, because people have requested an overhead lighting diagram, rather than just me painting on these things like I do with where the light is coming from. I'm actually going to have a diagram for these shots to show you where the instruments are relative to the people. And hopefully that helps. So you can download that on the show notes page. There'll be a little button that says download lighting PDF. And that's where you can get, I'll have the frame, I'll have the overhead diagram, and that way you can follow along so you know exactly what I'm talking about here, just in case you get lost. So over the garage, laying flat, the same level as the gutter on the house, we've got this 20 by 20. And that is just taking away all of the sunlight. And around the 20 by, we've also hung 12 by 12 blacks. So we've created a giant tent, right? An almost light, impenetrable tent. And you say, well, why would you do that? Why would you take all the light away? Well, we're doing that so that then we can control the amount of light and the angle of light that is traveling into the garage. Because if you just have skylight coming down, not enough is going to get in to give it some shape. So we're going to take all of the light away, and then we're going to create our own sun angle. And it's going to be a lower angle, and it's going to be a softer angle, and it's going to look better. And we're going to be able to keep it off the walls easier, because we'll be able to net things and flag things off much easier if it's smaller and more contained. So that's what we do here. As we enter shot number 5, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. As we go to shot number 6, this is our customer. He's now in the garage. You can see the back doors open to add a little bit of light in, but the rig is a 4K, an M40, We've got an Arri M40 through a 4x4 frame, through an 8x8 frame that has honeycomb on it, just to give it some direction and keep it off of all of the walls. And that M40 is providing all of the push into the garage. That's from outside. That's our fake sun. M40 pushing straight on. And really, that's the amount of light. That's the angle that you see here. That's the key. But then inside, we need some points of accent. We need some point of accent. And what that means is we're just going to use some practicals or some fake practicals to pop little areas of the background, because we want this to seem like a workspace. You know, in a working garage, you're going to have work lights, you're going to have clamp lights, you're going to have all of these things that can add little bits of interest and pick out little bits of background if we need some level. So that's what we've done. We've just hung over the car 2 4-foot quasar tubes. Those would have been tungsten, I think, or daylight or bicolor, and we played with them. But that's directly over the car where we're going to park the car inside, because we didn't leave the car in its original position. We moved the car all the way in so we could take advantage of the roof and the reflections that we're getting off of the roof in a shot like this. And in the background then on the wall, we bring in, art department brings in all these things. And one of the things they bring in is a little fluorescent lamp that we can put our own bulb in. And that is what's happening on the background frame right. So frame right, you see that wall, that pegboard wall with all the kit on there. That's being lit up by our practical lamp. So now we've got the M40 pushing through the 4x, pushing through the 8x. Then you've got the quasar tube over the top. That's giving us the reflection in the car. The camera's low enough to be able to get that reflection and keep the boring stuff out of the frame. We've got the open door camera left, which is providing some level, but more importantly, it's providing that little bit of highlight in the background to just give us that light to dark interest. And really, that's the whole shot. That's all it takes in terms of lighting, but it's also angle. And this is as fronty as we're going to get. This is because it is kind of fronty, this lighting. Because from here, now we're shooting as into the garage as we're ever going to be shooting. What we're going to do in the next shots is we're going to just reverse the angle and be shooting the other way into our spokesman, who's always going to be on the right-hand side of our customer. So it really is that blocking, and the angle and the setting of the camera is so important to keep the lighting looking nice. So we go from there to our the gentlemen that walk around the car and they're inspecting it and talking about the car. Remember, this is 30 seconds, so they don't have a whole lot of time to be able to do this, but they're walking, talking about it. And the second shot is, again, an example of where we're shooting into the garage. We're shooting into the back of the garage, but we're trying to get some shape on their faces. And you do that just by, you just keep shuffling to the right, keep shuffling in the direction that the light is coming from, or sorry, in the opposite direction that the light is coming from, and you're able to get that light to dark transition on their faces, or in this case, on their bodies. So at least you have something. At least it's just not all flat and contrasty. And because we're in the back of the garage now, we can play with the amount of light that's hitting the background. So here you've got that work light that I talked about earlier, that practical, and it is in the background. It's dimmed so low. I mean, you can almost see the bulb. But that's the kind of levels that we were at, because by the time you get the M40, you put it through a 4x frame of diffusion, you put it through the 8x, you put it 30 feet away. It's not tons and tons and tons of level. I mean, it's a lot, but it's not crazy amounts. So we got this thing dimmed super down to almost the point where you can see the filament, almost too low, really. But that's what looked best, and we played with those levels. And here, you got the M40 coming from frame left. There are some 4x4 floppies camera right, and we've closed the door to add some darkness to it because they're in the back of the garage. Then you've got that work clamp light, which is giving them a little tiny bit of edge, but more just a highlight in the background just to keep things interesting. You've got the different color of the eskies in the background, and I mean, it's looking for a garage shot. It looks like we're in a garage. It looks like it's pretty dark. It's not super dark. It feels like it could still be day outside, but there's not a whole lot of push going on. And this is what is nice. So we've got this vibe with the exact same setup that we had before, and it all happens with our positioning. So there we are inside the garage. Now, the important part is we're going to switch, because a lot of the commercial is a sit down between these two, and we need to make that look as good as we can. So we need to find a moment now to pivot to the other side of them. We need to go from shooting into the garage to shooting out of the garage. And this is the point where it's going to happen. In this next shot, you can see we've got, we're now at the back of the car. And we've got our tent outside. We've got our M40 shining through, and we flagged off the M40 off the entire back wall. So it is no longer, the M40 isn't touching the back wall at all. It's just hitting our man, and it's just hitting our customer frame left. And on camera left side of the frame, we've got our two 4x4 floppies. That's sucking up any of the ambient that's coming back from the M40. And this is where you start to see the shape and the choice to never show the door, right? So here, M40, camera right. In the background, we've got our little 2-foot quasar tube that we put in place of the fluorescent that was in there. That's doing the background. It's a different color. It's a tungsten-y lamp. And our M40 is in daylight mode. So you get that warm background, cooler on the skin tones, which isn't necessarily what you would always go for, but it makes sense in this situation because that's what's actually happening is daylight should be coming through that window. And what you'll see is just by the direction of the shadow is how low that M40 is to the ground. It's just pushing through and really getting level all the way to the back of the garage. And that's what you wouldn't get if you would to just let the sky sort of do its thing. So that is the shape there. And other than that, not much. I mean, what really adds to this image is you have the shape of our customer here. He's sort of blocking the shitty bits of the frame that we don't really need to know about. We want to connect these two. And we always have this gentleman, our spokesman, in a dirty in this series of commercials. So we wanted to do that. But we didn't want to draw too much attention to him. So there's not a whole lot of light on him. The light on the customer frame left is being blocked by the car. We've got a little bit of car reflection down there. We see his hand. And really, it's all about our spokesman at this point as they have this conversation. Now, you'll notice that we are shooting into the shadow, but we're not shooting into the shadow of our customer. So we need to flop sides. And we're going to flop sides on this specific cut. So it's going to go from this shot around to our customer. And this is where we're going to ignore the 180 degree rule and just make stuff that looks nice. So from this shot where they're sitting down just about to have a chat, get ready, warmed up to have a chat, this is when we flop. So we're going to go now to the other side and go into our interview bit of the customer. So now we got our customer interview set up. And we are looking at our guy here, and we've got two cameras shooting on him because, again, this is that portion of the commercial where we knew we really had to nail it just in case they said something that was not repeatable or the way that they delivered the line. This was going to be really important. They were just looking for a few specific grabs, and we needed to be rolling on all the time. So we've got myself, who's going to be on the 40 millimeter, and Colin is going to be on a longer lens. I think he was on the 75 millimeter. And this is where this is really where we reverse engineer the whole commercial. We need to land them in a spot that is going to look nice. As soon as we get in the garage, we knew we were going to have this shot or this series of shots. So where can we land them that's going to look good? And then you work the action backwards from there, chatting with the director, chatting with the first AD, saying, okay, this is exactly where we want them. Once we decide on that spot, well, how are they going to get there? How are they going to land? And those are all the shots that we looked at previously. Now we arrive here. And why did we choose this space? Number one, if you're looking at the customer shot, is there's nothing that is really competing with his head. There was a little break in the garage where you didn't have anything directly behind his head that was a distraction. You had stuff all over this garage, and that was part of the charm of it, was just packed full of shit. And that's interesting. It's interesting to look at. It adds color and variance to the background, so that is all good. But when we get into this interview portion of it, or this chat portion of it, we didn't really want anything competing with his head. Also, we talked about the light already. We wanted to be shooting into shadow to get that nice density to the look that we'd established the entire shot, the entire commercial, sorry. So we knew we had to be on the inside of the garage looking out. So this is where it all stems from. So for our customer here, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is shot number 9. If you're following along on the show notes page, wanderingdp.com/episode 133. We've got the M40, which is now, rather than being parked in the original position that it was outside the garage, we've just brought it a little bit downstream, so closer to the camera, just to try and get a little bit of wrap around to his other cheek. We weren't able to do it, but it just, the angle that we're positioned in the garage meant that it would have been hitting him a little bit too far in the back. So we just moved it around, and we moved the frame around, and then we kept it off the background just by flagging it off. So this is a good example of how with one light we can do multiple areas using nets and using flags to control the amount of level that is hitting the background, because the level that's hitting the background and the level that's hitting his face, it's the same light, it's the same source. We're just taking down the background and naturally shaping it like you would inside of Resolve with a power window. We're doing that on the day to get it as close as we can to the look that we're after, so that everyone knows what we're going for. So that's camera left is that M40 through the 4x, through the 8x8, and that is what's giving him his key light. Then camera right, we have our 4x4 floppies to take away the bounce back, the ambient that's coming, that would be bouncing off of the walls and hitting his fill side of the face, the shadow side. We didn't want that, so we negged that off. Then that work clamp light that you can see in shot number 7 behind our spokesman, that we just moved, we shuffled it down. You can see how in shot number 7, it's on that red esky, the clamp light, and then you go to shot number 9, and it's not on that red esky. It's on it's on the next beam over and providing a little bit of backlight. So we use that tungsten with a daylight to create the color contrast. So we have the color contrast and the light contrast. We're going from light to dark to light to dark. And this is the look that we end up with. You can see, like I say, I sort of like being a little bit lower when you're in these sorts of situations. I don't like looking directly at someone's eye line or from above. Just a little bit lower, especially on the 40, makes for a nice frame. And that's what we got here. So that's it for the example on him. It really is the angle that we've chosen allows us to get this look. If we were to be on the other side, it would be a lot more fronty looking and shitty looking. So that's that bit of the conversation. And we know that the customers are always in singles by themselves. They're clean. There's not dirty because it's their story. We come around to the spokesman. This is the second part of the shot. And we're again on the 40 millimeter, but this time we're dirty. But now we're shooting, instead of what we were doing before in that sit down shot where we were shooting on the open side of the customer, now we're shooting on the shadow side of the customer. And you can see how that changes the light in the background and how it changes the light on our spokesman. It's much more half and half. It's much more split 50-50 down his face, and we're still getting that shape. But again, by using the blacks on frame left, using the 4x4 floppies, we can dictate how much darkness there is or how much lightness. Maybe we bring in a bounce board. If it's too dark in there, we just bring something passive in to kick a little bit of that M40 back. But I liked the shape that it had naturally. And the M40 coming from frame right, hitting him, we didn't have to reposition the light at all. We didn't have to move it. We were able to move very quickly. And again, you got a tent outside controlling all the light. You got the M40 coming through. And then on the background, you're just using a series of flags, opening and shutting. You're sitting there at the monitor and you say to the key grip, we just need to take down that background a little bit. He gets on the blower and talks to his grip and says, okay, open it up, close it, what looks the best. And generally they'll come back to you with an idea saying, yep, it's done. You look at it, you say, okay, yeah, that looks pretty good, or no, it looks like shit. Take away more or take away less. It's a very, very, very quick process. And then, of course, the quasar tube in the background. And we turned off all of the quasars the 2 quasars that were above the car inside. Those were really only for that shot with the car in it. We weren't going to use that for this interview setup part. So this is really only a one light for the talent, and then the background is sort of that quasar and just using those flags off of it. And you can see the color difference between the tungsten and the daylight here. It adds a little bit of interest, which is what we're going for, but not super complicated, not difficult, pretty straightforward stuff. And then the final one, just to give you an idea of what the B camera is doing here, is just a longer option on a different lens and trying to break up and differentiate it between the A camera shot, just trying to break up the frame. So Colin's shooting through a whole bunch of garagey stuff. He's looking for things that are going to be reflective, that have a little highlight in them, that can add some contrast, and then finding a frame that makes sense. The reason we are shooting through this stuff is because it's a super small garage, and we're backed up our backs are touching the walls, we couldn't really move them forward anymore, else it would look too close to the other wall, which spatially wouldn't make sense during the ad. I think you'd be able to feel the jump in location. So to keep it as consistent as possible, we are backed up against the wall, and the grips just come in. They put up a little plank on a C-stand, and then we start playing with shit to put in front of the lens. Colin gets a spot to where he thinks is happy. And then we have two different angles that both work. So, you're seeing how Colin's just maybe literally a shoulder next to me on a longer lens. You can see what a difference that makes in the angles between these two shots of the customer. It makes a really big difference. And even more, you can sort of feel the fill more on Colin's shot rather than mine feels a little bit crunchier. And that's just because of the angle that we're looking at, nothing more. And that's it. That is how you get through an entire commercial. And I just realized now that we completely ignored the hotline. I completely did not get any of the messages ready. My apologies. But definitely if you've got a comment or a question for the show or a topic for the show, or you just want to let us know where you're listening from and what you're doing, the kind of stuff that you're working on, please go to the show notes page, get on there, leave a message on the hotline, and we'll try and get you on the show. But that is it for our meet and greet. I'm sure some of you are saying, thank God it's over. Others will miss our spokesman and their customer friends. But it's not every day that you shoot inside a garage, exterior to interior, but it seems like for me, it almost is every other job. There is some sort of call for this. And you get better with time. You get burned once where you're like, fuck, we should have tented this whole thing, and we didn't. And now you just say, just tent it. It's just that much easier. And so that's what we did. That was the whole thing. And this is what kicked off the entire job. So that is it for this episode of The Breakdown. Again, if you want those overheads of all the situations that we're talking about here, go to the show notes page and just click on the button and you'll be able to download it straight from there, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so this is over on YouTube, probably again on Instagram TV if you want to watch there. And this may be, I say maybe because the next job is, there's questions over whether or not I'll be able to do a breakdown on the podcast, so that may happen over on Patreon. But next week we got a fantastic cinematographer lined up, and we've got a few different interviews back to back to back, so it's going to be all good things. And again, join us for that live stream over on Patreon. It's going to be a lot of fun, and look out for those videos on YouTube of little Patreon teasers, the snippets of stuff that I think people are going to get a lot out of. Okay, here we go. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. It's the music bed, you crazy sons of bitches. The music bed is hosting its annual Film and Music Conference 2018, September 28th and 29th in Fort Worth, Texas. You know the place. We've talked about it. You know the coupon code. You know the code to save yourself 10%, which is WanderingDP. The tickets are $599. You can find more info at filmandmusic.com. And Film and Music Conference brings top creatives and filmmakers together for 2 days of inspiration, education, and new connections. And this is on top of all the fantastic other stuff that the Music Bed does for the podcast, which is you can get 20% off your next on-site license with WanderingDP code there as well. Where you can find all the music that you need for your next project. We've talked about that. And the speakers lined up: Robert Legato, Oscar-winning VFX supervisor; Franklin Leonard, the founder of The Blacklist. I know we got a lot of directors here that are trying to move into narrative stuff, and you got your script writing thing. You want to talk about a person who has read one or two and knows a thing about this side of the business. Franklin Leonard really is the man. And if you don't know what The Blacklist is, it's a yearly publication highlighting Hollywood's most popular unproduced screenplays. Basically, you want to get your name on that, and you write your ticket to the Oscars. We've got Rain Allen Miller, a visionary director and writer with a unique storytelling style. So for directors out there who are looking to get into the commercial side of things and blend their own voice into that world, Rain's fantastic for that. She is currently represented at Some Such, a production company featuring some of the top directors in the industry. So would be one of those, I guess, if she's included in the top directors in the industry. Rain has worked with leading creative agencies such as Havas, Exposure, and Wyden and Kennedy. She developed her award-winning career at Mother London, generating work for clients including Save the Children, Money Supermarket, BAFTA, and IKEA. Who else did we not talk about the week before? Did we talk about the DP, Laura Gonzalez? She brings her style and essence to every stunning project she's a part of, and it's completely unmistakable, her style. I haven't seen it, but if the copy says that's the case, then I must believe that's the case. She shot commercial projects for brands like Canon, Guinness, Microsoft, Michelob, as well as music videos for Bjork and Sigur Rós and several award-winning films. So you're going to have people like that. You're going to have your cinematographers. You got your screenplay specialists. You got your VFX supervisor. Is there any base that hasn't been covered? Not only all of these people, but they're also announcing future speakers and breakout groups. So there is going to be tons and tons of stuff to choose from, and you are going to be inundated with facts, information, little tidbits you can take away and make yourself a better human being. That is all happening in Fort Worth, Texas, 28th, 29th, Film and Music. What's the website again? Let's go check it out. filmandmusic.com. Wandering DP is the coupon code. Save yourself 10%. Whew, we made it. And I still feel bad. I feel bad about the whole hotline thing. I've been talking it up and I'm completely ignored it. Okay, that is going to do it for this week on the podcast. Get over to YouTube, leave some comments, and thank you very much for the support. We'll see you in the live stream or next week, back with another guest, and maybe not even in this studio. Maybe not even in this closet, maybe in a proper place. And I'll have to do an Instagram story on it or something. Okay. That's it. Goodbye for now. Bye, bye, bye.
You've been listening to the Wandering DP podcast. For more information on the topics discussed in this episode and for show notes, visit www.wanderingdp.com. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to rate, like, and subscribe on iTunes.